The Nexus Combat Academy floated in the neutral zone between three star systems, a testament to galactic cooperation and the universal need to train beings how to kill each other more efficiently. It was, according to its glossy recruitment holovids, the premier military training facility in the known galaxy. What the holovids didn't mention was that it was also the galaxy's most expensive insurance nightmare, largely due to the unfortunate tendency of various species to discover new and creative ways to maim each other during what was supposed to be controlled training exercises. The Academy's sprawling structure resembled a massive crystalline flower, its petals housing different training environments designed to accommodate the bewildering variety of physiologies that made up the Galactic Defense Coalition. There were aquatic chambers for the cetacean delegates, low-gravity zones for the gossamer-boned ethereals, and reinforced bunkers for species whose idea of light sparring involved small explosives. It was a marvel of engineering, political compromise, and really excellent insurance coverage. Commander Vel'tar Nexus, a being whose species had evolved from something resembling a cross between a praying mantis and a tax accountant, surveyed the morning's training roster with the weary resignation of someone who had seen too many medical claims. The Academy had been operating for 3 standard cycles now, and they had successfully managed to train elite soldiers from 47 different species without any major diplomatic incidents. This was considered a minor miracle, given that the Zephyrian contingent had tried to declare war on the ventilation system during their first week. Today's roster included representatives from 12 species, which was actually a relatively calm day. The Caraxian battlemonks were practicing their meditation techniques in Sector 7, the plasma-wreathed ignitions were learning restraint in the flame-proof chambers, and the crystalline resonants were attempting to understand the concept of indoor voice in the acoustically dampened halls. All perfectly normal, except for one small notation that made Vel'tar's compound eyes twitch with barely suppressed anxiety. Human. Female. Age, 23 standard cycles. Species designation, Deathworlder. The classification Deathworlder had been created by the Galactic Taxonomy Board after humanity's rather explosive introduction to galactic society 3 cycles ago. It was a polite way of saying these beings evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them every moment of every day, and somehow they survived long enough to achieve spaceflight, which is both impressive and deeply concerning. Earth, humanity's homeworld, had been classified as a Class 12 death world, which put it in the same category as planets where it rained acid and the local wildlife considered antimatter a dietary supplement. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived on such a world had caused considerable debate among xenobiologists, most of whom concluded that humans were either incredibly lucky or completely insane. The prevailing theory was both. The Academy had accepted its first human applicant as part of a cultural exchange program, though cultural exchange was diplomatic speak for let's see what happens when we poke this particular sleeping predator with a stick. The human in question was one Zara Voss, a compact female with a kind of easy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and the sort of casual confidence that made seasoned warriors quietly re-evaluate their life choices. Zara had arrived on the Academy transport 3 days ago, along with her species' standard diplomatic greeting of "Hi there, where's the food?" She had been polite, friendly, and utterly unremarkable by human standards, which meant she was absolutely terrifying by everyone else's standards. Her medical evaluation had required 3 separate scanning sessions because the medical staff kept assuming their equipment was malfunctioning. No being, they reasoned, could possibly have that much muscle density, bone strength, and neuroresponse speed without some form of technological enhancement. The revelation that this was simply baseline human physiology had caused the Academy's chief medical officer to request a transfer to a nice, quiet research station studying the mating habits of space plankton. Training Day 4 began like any other day at the Academy, which is to say with the kind of belly-controlled chaos that would have given safety inspectors nightmares if safety inspectors were brave enough to visit institutions that regularly taught people to fight with plasma weapons. The morning session was Basic Combat Coordination, a euphemistic title for let's see if we can get through 30 minutes without anyone ending up in the medical bay. The training hall was a vast, oval chamber with adaptive flooring that could shift from soft impact-absorbing gel to reinforced durasteel, depending on the training requirements. The walls were lined with force field generators and enough medical sensors to monitor the vital signs of a small army, which, given the Academy's history, was probably a wise precaution. Instructor Thane Bricks, a grizzled veteran whose species resembled an upright bear crossed with a particularly patient librarian, surveyed his mixed species class with the expression of someone who had long ago accepted that his job description included preventing interstellar incidents during lunch break. His students represented a cross-section of the galaxy's finest, the proud, unabound Vel'tarians with their distinctive ridge-crested skulls, the multilimbed Nexuri who moved like liquid mercury, and the imposing Krusthan whose idea of casual conversation involved detailed discussions of optimal siege tactics. And then there was Zara, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the kind of relaxed alertness that prey animals developed when they realized the thing watching them wasn't actually a rock. "Today's exercise," Thane announced, his translation caller converting his gravelly speech into the common galactic tongue, "will focus on restraint and control. You will be paired with partners from different species backgrounds to practice non-lethal submission techniques." The announcement was met with the usual mix of anticipation and barely concealed dread that accompanied any academy training exercise. The students had learned, through painful experience, that the academy's definition of non-lethal was somewhat more flexible than most species preferred. Keth'var Thornscale, a draconic whose species had spent the last 10,000 years perfecting the art of looking intimidating while breathing, examined his fellow trainees with the calculating gaze of a predator selecting dinner. The draconics were a proud warrior culture, descended from beings who had conquered their homeworld's apex predators by the simple expedient of being bigger, stronger, and more stubborn than everything else on the planet. They were natural soldiers, born with reflexes that could track a plasma bolt in flight and muscles that could crush durasteel with the same effort most species use to open a door. Keth'var's golden eyes settled on the small human female, and something resembling amusement flickered across his reptilian features. Humans, according to the briefings he had read, were persistence hunters from a high-gravity world. Dangerous in their own environment, perhaps, but hardly a match for a superior draconic warrior in a controlled setting. The fact that she was barely half his size and appeared to be constructed primarily of soft tissue and questionable life choices only reinforced his assessment. When Instructor Thane began announcing the training partnerships, Keth'var made his request with the supreme confidence of a being who had never encountered anything his species couldn't handle through the application of superior strength and tactical breathing. "I volunteer to partner with the human," he announced, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came from growing up in a culture where might made right and breathing fire was considered a valid argument technique. Thane's ears flattened against his skull, a gesture that in his species indicated either deep concern or the early stages of a migraine. "Are you certain, Cadet Thornscale? Human physiology can be unpredictable." Keth'var's laugh was the sound of controlled thunder. "Instructor, I have faced the siege worms of Krextal and emerged victorious. I believe I can handle one small Deathworlder." The phrase famous last words existed in 47 different galactic languages, though in Draconic it translated roughly to "hold my ale and watch this." It was a concept that transcended species boundaries and united the galaxy in its appreciation for the moment just before someone made a spectacularly poor decision. Zara, who had been quietly stretching with the fluid grace of someone whose species had spent millennia being chased by things with more teeth than was strictly necessary, looked up at her newly assigned partner with mild interest. She took in Keth'var's impressive height, his muscular build, and the way he carried himself with the supreme confidence of a being who had never met anything he couldn't intimidate. "Hi there," she said with the kind of friendly smile that made survival instincts start sending urgent memos to the conscious mind. "Looking forward to working with you." The training exercise began with basic positioning and grip work, standard techniques designed to teach proper form before progressing to actual combat scenarios. The various species pairs spread out across the training flow, each working within the physical parameters appropriate to their particular physiologies. The ethereals practiced techniques that looked more like an interpretive dance, while the Krusthan engaged in what appeared to be architectural engineering using each other as building materials. Keth'var approached the exercise with the methodical precision of a being whose species had turned warfare into an art form. He demonstrated each technique with careful control, his movements flowing with the kind of deadly grace that came from genetic memory and 10,000 years of selective breeding for combat effectiveness. He was, by any objective measure, an excellent training partner, knowledgeable, controlled, and professional. He was also, by human standards, condescending as hell. You'll want to adjust your stance, he advised as Zara practiced a basic grappling position. Your species' bipedal locomotion creates inherent balance issues that you'll need to compensate for. Zara nodded agreeably and adjusted her position, though anyone familiar with human facial expressions might have noticed that her smile had taken on a slightly sharper quality. Interesting, she said. On my world, we call that standing up. Your grip strength will be insufficient for most submission holds, Keth'var continued, apparently oblivious to the subtle change in atmospheric pressure that humans tended to generate when their patience began wearing thin. Perhaps we should focus on evasion techniques instead. They are more suited to your physical limitations. Physical limitations, Zara repeated thoughtfully. Right. The exercise progressed through increasingly complex scenarios, with Keth'var providing a running commentary on human inadequacy that would have been impressive in its thoroughness if it hadn't been so catastrophically wrong. He explained how human reflexes were too slow for serious combat, how their muscle density was insufficient for effective grappling, and how their lack of natural weapons put them at a severe disadvantage against properly evolved predator species. Zara listened to this critique of her species with the kind of polite attention that prey animals gave to predators right up until the moment they decided to stop being prey. The other training pairs had begun to take notice of the ongoing commentary. The Vel'tarians, whose culture valued honor and respectful combat, exchanged glances that suggested they were reconsidering their initial assessment of draconic sophistication. The Nexuri, who communicated primarily through pheromone releases, were producing chemical signatures that roughly translated to "this is about to get interesting" in the kind of way that requires medical attention. Even Instructor Thane had begun paying closer attention to the pair, his professional instincts warning him that the atmospheric tension in the training hall had reached the kind of levels that typically preceded incident reports and insurance claims. The moment that would later be analyzed by xenopsychologists, military strategists, and emergency medical personnel arrived with the kind of sudden inevitability that made hindsight both painful and expensive. Keth'var, in a display of what he clearly considered helpful instruction, decided to demonstrate proper restraint technique by grabbing Zara's arm without warning. It was, by draconic standards, a gentle, controlled movement designed to illustrate superior positioning and leverage. It was the kind of technique that would have been perfectly acceptable when practiced between members of his own species, who possessed the cultural context and physical resilience to understand it as a training exercise. Unfortunately for Keth'var, humans had spent several million years developing responses to being grabbed unexpectedly by large predators, and those responses had been refined through countless generations of natural selection into something approaching biological poetry. The human nervous system, when presented with the sensation of being seized by a potential threat, could process and respond to that information in approximately 13 milliseconds. This was faster than most species could complete a conscious thought, and significantly faster than Keth'var's brain could register what was happening to his elbow. Zara's response was not conscious, considered, or controlled. It was the end result of countless ancestral encounters with saber-toothed tigers, cave bears, and other enthusiastic predators, who had made the tactical error of assuming that small, apparently defenseless primates were easy prey. Her body moved with a kind of fluid precision that came from having every reflex optimized for survival, every muscle fiber trained for the split-second transition from victim to threat. The sound that echoed through the training hall was distinctive, sharp, and immediately recognizable to anyone who had ever heard a major structural component fail under stress. It was the sound of Keth'var's elbow joint discovering that human grip strength calculations had been based on incomplete data, and that the phrase "physical limitations" was about to require significant revision. Keth'var's bellow of surprise and pain filled the chamber with the kind of volume that made the acoustic dampeners work overtime. He staggered backward, clutching his arm with an expression of shocked bewilderment that suggested his worldview was undergoing rapid and involuntary reconstruction. The training hall fell silent except for the soft hum of medical sensors switching to emergency monitoring mode and the gentle hiss of Keth'var's breathing, which had taken on the shallow, rapid quality that indicated his pain management systems were working at full capacity. Zara released her grip and stepped back, her posture immediately shifting from combat-ready to concerned. The transformation was so rapid that observers later swore they had witnessed some form of shape-shifting, though medical analysis would eventually confirm that it was simply human behavioral flexibility operating at peak efficiency. "Oh no," she said, and the genuine distress in her voice was unmistakable. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" That was completely reflexive. "I didn't mean to." "Medical. We need medical." The Academy's emergency response system, which had been designed to handle everything from plasma burns to temporal displacement, activated with the smooth efficiency of a well-rehearsed dance. Medical drones descended from the ceiling while force field stretches materialized around Keth'var, who was still staring at his damaged arm with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly challenging philosophical paradox. Dr. Helixvane, the Academy's chief medical officer who had recently requested a transfer to study space plankton, arrived with the kind of professional calm that came from dealing with training accidents on a daily basis. She took one look at Keth'var's elbow, ran a quick diagnostic scan, and made a sound that in her species indicated either profound admiration or severe digestive distress. "Complex fracture of the humeral epicondyle," she announced to her medical team. "Damage to the lateral collateral ligament complex, and what appears to be a complete dislocation of the radial head. Treatment time, 6 to 8 standard cycles." She turned to examine Zara, who was standing by with the kind of helpful anxiety that humans displayed when they had accidentally broken something expensive. "And you are completely uninjured," Dr. Vane continued, her scanner readings confirming what her eyes could already see. "Not even elevated stress indicators." Remarkable. The word remarkable in medical terminology could mean many things, but in this context it roughly translated to "I'm going to need a much stronger drink and a comprehensive review of human physiological data before I file this report." The incident analysis that followed would eventually become required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy, though the initial investigation was conducted with a kind of methodical thoroughness that suggested everyone involved was hoping to find some reasonable explanation for what had just occurred. Security footage confirmed that Keth'var had indeed initiated contact, grabbing Zara's arm with what the analysis determined was appropriate force for routine training purposes between beings of similar physical capacity. The footage also confirmed that Zara's response had taken less than a quarter of a second from initial contact to structural failure of Keth'var's elbow joint. Biomechanical analysis revealed that the force applied had been precisely calibrated to neutralize the threat without causing additional damage, a level of control that suggested extensive training or evolutionary optimization. When investigators learned that Zara had no formal combat training beyond basic self-defense courses, the report required additional review by specialists in evolutionary biology and emergency medicine. The revelation that this had been an unconscious reflex action caused the Academy's Risk Assessment Department to schedule an emergency meeting, several strong drinks, and a comprehensive review of the policies regarding Deathworlder species. Keth'var, from his position in the medical bay where advanced regeneration therapy was slowly rebuilding his elbow joint, had time to contemplate the philosophical implications of his recent educational experience. The pain medication had provided him with the kind of crystal-clear insight that typically accompanied significant trauma, and he was beginning to understand that his assumptions about human capabilities had been based on incomplete data. "She apologized," he told Dr. Vane during one of his treatment sessions, his voice carrying the wonder of someone discovering a new fundamental truth about the universe. "She broke my arm in 13 milliseconds and then immediately apologized. What kind of species does that?" Dr. Vane, who had spent the last several days reviewing human medical literature and questioning her career choices, looked up from her charts with the expression of someone who had seen too much and understood too little. "The kind that evolved on a planet where everything wanted to kill them," she replied, "and somehow learned to be polite about it." The news of the incident spread through the Academy with the kind of velocity typically associated with gossip, scandal, and really good cafeteria food. Within hours, every cadet, instructor, and maintenance worker knew about the human who had casually dismantled a draconic warrior's arm and then offered to help fill out the medical forms. The response from the various species contingents was as diverse as their physiologies. The Vel'tarians, whose culture valued martial prowess above most other qualities, began treating Zara with a kind of respectful distance they typically reserved for unexploded ordnance. The Krusthin, who appreciated efficiency in all things, started including her in their tactical discussions. The Nexuri began producing pheromone signatures that roughly translated to "do not startle the small predator." The most significant change, however, came from the Academy's administration. Commander Vel'tar, after reviewing the incident reports and consulting with various specialists in interspecies relations, made the decision that would eventually reshape military training protocols throughout the galaxy. "We're implementing new safety procedures," he announced at the next staff meeting, his compound eyes focused on a datapad containing revised training protocols. "All exercises involving Deathworlder species will now require additional supervision, modified equipment standards, and comprehensive briefings on species-specific physiological responses." The new protocols, unofficially known as the Zara Voss rules, included mandatory education sessions on human reflexes, updated medical equipment capable of handling the aftermath of human defensive responses, and a strongly worded recommendation that instructors avoid startling their human trainees without adequate preparation and protective gear. Zara herself adapted to her new status with a kind of pragmatic acceptance that her species had developed over countless generations of dealing with situations that didn't quite make sense but had to be managed anyway. She continued her training with enthusiasm and competence, though her fellow cadets now approached sparring sessions with a kind of careful respect typically reserved for live weapons demonstrations. Keth'var, once his elbow had been restored to full functionality, requested a transfer to the same training group. When asked why he wanted to continue working with the human who had hospitalized him, he replied with the kind of simple honesty that his species valued above all other qualities. "I want to learn," he said. "My species has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare, but we never learned to fight something that could break us and then apologize for it. That seems like a useful skill." The Academy's first human graduate completed her training 6 months later with honors, commendations, and a medical file that would serve as a reference document for generations of military physicians. Her final examination included a practical combat assessment that had to be redesigned 3 times to account for the fact that standard testing protocols kept underestimating human capabilities. The graduation ceremony was attended by representatives from 47 different species, including several high-ranking military officials who had come to observe the Academy's newest addition to Galactic Defense Forces. Zara received a commission with the same friendly smile she had worn on her first day, though observers noted that her fellow graduates maintained a respectful distance during the congratulatory reception. Commander Vel'tar, in his closing remarks, observed that the Academy had successfully trained its first Deathworlder without any major diplomatic incidents, permanent injuries, or insurance claims exceeding their annual budget. This was considered a significant achievement, given that their initial projections had included provisions for structural damage and emergency evacuation procedures. The speech concluded with an observation that would eventually become part of Academy tradition. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, filled with threats that challenge our understanding and capabilities. It is reassuring to know that some of those threats are on our side." In the months that followed, applications from human candidates increased by 300%, though Academy admissions officers noted that the application process now included detailed medical examinations and psychological evaluations designed to identify individuals with appropriate levels of controlled lethality. The Nexus Combat Academy continued to operate as the premier military training facility in the known galaxy, though its insurance premiums had increased significantly after the adjusters learned about human reflex speeds and grip strength. The Academy's motto, "Excellence through Diversity," took on new meaning as instructors learned to appreciate the educational value of nearly having their limbs removed by polite, apologetic students. And somewhere in the Academy's archives, filed between the incident reports and the medical analyses, was a single notation that captured the essential truth of humanity's introduction to galactic military service: approach with caution, handle with care, apologizes profusely while breaking your bones. The galaxy, it seemed, was still learning what it meant to have Deathworlders as allies. But they were learning quickly, because the alternative was significantly more painful and considerably less polite.